and welcome to the InvestGP committee meeting of March 19th, 2024. The people on this committee are myself, Councillor Blackmore, Councillor Bressie, Councillor Plott, and Mayor Clayton is online. With that, I will ask for a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Plott.
So moved.
Mayor Clayton. Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. So we'll move on. We have no delegations today, and I would ask for a service area update. We'll go to Rory Tarrant to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. For the service area update today for InvestGP, for economic development, the rural renewal stream has had 101 candidate endorsement letters issued to date. There are 16 employer applications have been received in the last 14 days, and to date, there's been 414 positions available to qualified employers. On March 5th, the Invest Grande Prairie team, alongside with the mayor, had a successful tour of the city with a new psychiatrist. The physician is set to join the Grande Prairie Regional Hospital team early this summer. On March 8th, the Invest Grande Prairie team, along with the mayor and council, attended the launch celebration of NWP's Centre for Community Enhancement and Social Innovation. The business visitation program has kicked off, and our business retention and expansion coordinator is currently meeting with businesses through that program. There have been 13 new business welcome emails sent for licenses issued between February 13th and March 10th. Of these, 10 were commercial and 3 were home-based. For investment and traction, this week the Invest Grande Prairie team is at the Ag Tech and Future Foods Conference as part of Team Alberta Approach with other municipalities, as well as there with Invest Alberta. The team will be meeting with businesses in the Ag Tech sector, showcasing the city's potential for food and beverage manufacturing, and as well as processing and vertical agriculture. Additionally, this week, the mayor and chief of staff are at CIRA Week, which is one of the premier energy conferences in the world. They're there promoting our energy and petrochemical sector, meeting with investors, government officials, and agencies to drive our local and regional opportunities in the energy sector. For events and entertainment, Live Nation and the Bonnettes Energy Centre are bringing Tennille Towns home for a first arena show on November 19th, 2024. Tickets are on sale to the general public Friday, March 22nd, so make sure to pick some tickets up for that. The Storm are in the first round of the AJHL playoffs versus the Calgary Canucks. Although they lost their first 2 games, they were able to pull it back last night and win Game 3. Game 4 is tonight at the Bonnettes Energy Centre, and puck drops at 7 p.m. If there will be a Game 6 required, it would be held at home here on March 24th. Bonnettes Energy Centre is pleased to be hosting the Youth Career Discovery Expo on March 21st. There's over 1,900 students have pre-registered for this event, so it'll be a great draw to the city and great for the youth that are going. On March 29th, Letter Kenny Presents will be promoted at the NWP Cardinal Theatre by the Events and Entertainment team. And finally, the East Indian Cultural Association will be holding their annual Vaisakhi celebration at the Bows on April 20th. And that concludes the service update.
Thank you, Mr. Tarrant. Do we have any questions regarding the staff update? I'm seeing no hands pop up, so thank you very much, Mr. Tarrant. We'll move on to item 4.2, agriculture practices in urban areas, and I would ask Chief Glavin to introduce this subject.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. Administration was asked to bring back information regarding opportunities to allow for agricultural practices as weed control, as well as fire smart information on agricultural lands adjacent to residential. This was in response to some of the rezoning applications that we've had brought forward over the last few years, and with that I'll turn it over to Ms. Downey.
I might need to pull out closer. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Chair Blackmore. At the meeting held on December 5th, 2023, this committee passed a motion asking administration to bring back information regarding opportunities to allow agricultural practices as weed control in existing land uses and information regarding fire smart on agricultural lands adjacent to residential areas. Landowners in Alberta bear the responsibility for managing noxious weeds and prohibiting noxious weeds as mandated by the Alberta Weed Act. Municipalities are tasked with appointing a sufficient number of weed inspectors to enforce weed control regulations. Various methods such as cutting, spraying, and pulling are available to landowners for weed control, and agricultural practices may aid in weed control as such practices involve cutting and potentially chemical control, both considered as controls in the Weed Act. While farming could be considered weed control, there are risks to allowing an unauthorized use. The land may still be eligible to be assessed at the farmland rate. Neglecting to enforce bylaws, including land use regulations, may lead to significant liability and legal disputes. Development outside zoning regulations constrain infrastructure, and inadequate enforcement of regulation undermines the municipality's ability to ensure orderly and sustainable development, resulting in loss of planning control. Farming in close proximity to urban development can have fire risks. The Fire Smart framework targets wildfire risk near communities and infrastructure, emphasizing education, prevention, and mitigation. It advocates for maintaining buffers to lower fire intensity and improve firefighter access. The Grande Prairie Fire Department suggests a land use bylaw amendment mandating firesmiths risk assessments at the development permit stage for agricultural uses. The assessments would inform site-specific mitigation measures. Thank you, and Case, Chris, and I are here to answer any of your questions regarding weed control and fire risk. Thank you.
Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you, Chair Blackmore. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I get the idea of if you've got vegetation growing that there's fire smart risks to that, but I don't understand how it seems to be saying that the report is saying that there's increased risks over the status quo. And right now we allow vegetation to grow as long as it's not noxious weeds on undeveloped lots. Do we see the types of vegetation that's grown in agricultural practices as more risky than the vegetation we're allowing right now? I'm just trying to understand what actually changes from a fire smart principle if we switch from the status quo to agricultural use.
So through the chair, I can answer that hopefully for you, Councillor Bressie. It speaks to variability, so it's not exactly black and white. First, we look at current state. Are we actually meeting what we want to intend for those current land use provisions? Are we currently overgrowing when we shouldn't be? And that's more of a question for a parks assessment. However, when it comes to the variability coming full circle, we look at creating buffer zones and not providing an environment for encroachment of potential wildfire. And we have lessons learned from various other examples, Fort McMurray, High Level, Slave Lake, which talk about understanding assessment through buffer zones, the variability, the amount of growth, the density, the fuel types, and establishing a risk assessment tool which will say, what does that look like on a site-specific basis, and what kind of buffers would potentiate ease of access while allowing for what needs to happen in urban agricultural practices at the same time. So it is a multifaceted approach with different disciplines to make that assessment, and it's why the emphasis is on the tool per se to make sure that we're not creating a black and white environment, but understanding the variability with all those factors. Does that help?
Yeah, again, I totally get what you're saying. It all makes sense to me, but we're not doing that with the status quo on these lands. So I'm trying to see what risks there are if we allow agricultural use in terms of, we've got basically wild grassland happening on these lots right now. And is wild grassland more fire safe than an agricultural wheat crop, for example?
So through the chair, it all depends on the growing season as well.
Okay.
Are you in a green growth season? Are you in a drought? There's a lot of other factors that are at play, so it's a much more complicated issue. And I'm not an expert, as would be Parks, in terms of the combustible fuel level based on water contents during the growth season. However, from a fire smart perspective, we know that more fuel load and greater density and increased resistance to access means a higher risk level for us when it comes to the fire department.
Go ahead, Councillor Bressy.
So it sounds to me that that's an argument for agricultural use, because if it's right now, we allow, if there's not noxious weeds, we allow the grass to grow, and then it dries off the grass, whatever other vegetation, to grow over the winter, and then it just gets left in the fall, and it's dry there. It's dry there in the spring. Whereas if you've got agricultural use and you're taking that load off in the fall, I'm missing out on how that's not better than the status quo from a fire smart perspective.
Through the chair, again, I would speak to the fact that you're not wrong by any means. It's one way of looking at the perspective, and again, it speaks to the potentiality of wildfire based on a whole lot of variables. And from us as a perspective, it's why we look at the data, and from a fire marshal's perspective for fire prevention, we go evidence-based practice. So we look at lessons learned from the report that was submitted. The International Coalition out of Toronto did an assessment on all of those recent fires and talked about zoning in terms of how far back and the types of fuel that would be associated. So it's not to say that that's an incorrect statement like what you meant, but it just to do a deeper dive to say where and how those zones present in site-specific locations would be what we're asking for in a risk assessment. Because in certain areas where it potentiates ease of access, lower fuel load because it's going to be traditionally more green throughout the year versus and lesser density for population, there might be considerations for zoning 1, 2, and 3, like that said. So, and again, it just comes back to that whole black and white. It's not an incorrect statement, but it warrants further discussion on site-specific locations.
I have a question. At this time, I don't believe we have any policy or requirement for undeveloped land to have fire breaks between the grasslands and the residents that abut that. You want to address that?
Through the chair, are you speaking specifically to bylaws? You said bylaw?
Specifically to, is that a useful fire break or a useful fire smart practice that maybe we should look at?
So through the chair, there are other municipalities, if you do a jurisdictional scan, who have gone through recent events and some that have been proactive in that nature to say we need a matrix or we need a rubric or something of a risk assessment that defines what we need to do, and they carry that in policy through development, or they carry that in bylaw for impositions on new development to conduct a wildfire risk assessment so that building envelopes, setbacks coincide with topographical, geographical implications in terms of development and what that looks like.
So, Mr. Rennick, is that anything that we are looking at in the future? Is there any intent to bring that forward at a later date?
So through the chair, from the Grande Prairie Fire Department, we did suggest that a matrix be looked at and a wildfire risk assessment coincide at the planning and development stage for all new developments that might have a risk assessment that warrants that kind of an environment.
Okay. I have no further questions. Mayor Clayton? Any? Nothing?
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay. Then I think we have no more questions today, so I would ask for business arising. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. I would just make a motion that the committee receive this report for information.
That motion is in order. I see no other hands being raised, so I will call a question.
Mayor Clayton in favor.
Councillor Plott in favor.
That does carry, and I will go to Councillor Bressy for further.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Blackmore. It's, I think I'm going to make a follow-up motion, and that's. I don't know if it'll pass. We'll see what committee thinks of this, but I don't know if I would move the committee direct administration to bring back I guess I'll tell you where I'm going with this. I'm trying to phrase my meeting. Maybe we don't have to work on this if committee's not interested at all. But for me, still, it is. I've shared before that I really am uncomfortable with our process of rezoning land because we want to allow agricultural use for supposedly weed control. For me, it seems that this should be something that we can do just within a discretionary use of land without going through the rezoning again. For me, I want to make sure that we've got as much market-ready land as possible when we're in a housing crisis and we're trying to get houses built, to say, hey, we are going to ask developers to rezone away from land they can actually build houses on, just seems counterproductive to me. And so I personally think that we should just have requirements around, hey, if you do this, then you can do agricultural use as a discretionary use in residential zone land, or I guess just in undeveloped land. So I guess if thinking out loud, my motion would be direct administration to bring back recommended considerations if council added agricultural use as discretionary in certain land use districts. And for me, I'd like to say, all right, so if we actually did want to add this as discretionary in certain land use districts, what would the actual, I'd like to actually see, all right, so fire risk assessment, we said is one idea we'd like to look at, but it's just, that's very high level. I'd like to know a little bit more about what we're doing with that. For me, I also think there's considerations. For example, you're not going to allow one lot to be agricultural use, but maybe there's a minimum size that we're allowing now to happen. I know we've had conversations in the past of we've said no to rezoning some land because it was fully serviced with sidewalks, roads. But just are there criteria that we can actually use to look at and say, hey, this is land that we'd support for agricultural use, and this is land that we wouldn't support for agricultural use?
Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. I like where you're going with it, but I can't support it because I actually think I guess my take on the market is we've had a long downturn. And so you've had a lot of developers come back that had a lot more optimism of what the market is going to do and repurposing that. I do not get the impression moving forward this is going to be an issue. So my concern would be that we go through a whole process change. I think the market has adapted to that. I don't think you're going to see quarter sections being developed at one swath like we have in the past. So I think market has sorted this out. I don't think we need to do much more with this from an administrative point of view. We're getting one file, maybe two files a year that have switched over the last 5 years. I think most of those files have probably switched over. So I think it'd be a desktop exercise that's going to create work for admin. I don't think it's going to change any outcomes to me, so I wouldn't be supportive of it.
Councillor Bressie.
Yeah, and I guess just for me, it's 5 years ago when this whole thing started. I remember getting told, "Hey, we don't need to think of a bigger policy for us because it's just a one-off." And now 5 years later, we're still struggling with this. And so I hope you're right, Councillor Plott. I hope that the market's very different than it is there, but it has been an ongoing issue for 5 years. And I guess for me, I'll stand by the motion. I need to make it. I've been making lots of waves about this every time it comes, and if this fails a committee, then I'm happy to be quiet about it. But I feel that I need to push where I can push for it. So I'll stand by the motion and see where committee goes with it.
Mayor Clayton.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. So I'm just reading the motion. So your intent, Councillor Bressie, is the recommendation will come back to council or to committee?
No, my intent is that committee receive a list of, hey, what things should council be thinking about when it's considering agricultural use? But that's conversations coming back to committee, not to council.
Yeah, so if that can be clarified in the motion, if I'm happy to have these this conversation, explore options. I tend to agree with Councillor Plott, but I'm interested in seeing what administration brings back for consideration. So I will support the motion if, now that it's been cleaned up. Thank you.
And I have a further question. Does the land need to be called agricultural in order to be hayed? Can that not fall under the category of weed control. I think we had this discussion the last time this came forward before. So I'm looking for someone in administration to perhaps CAO Burke to, like, if we call it weed control and not agricultural, that takes the whole tax issue out of the mix, does it not?
No, and that's where through the chair. No, if we're allowing agricultural, we have to tax it as agricultural is the advice we've had. But that's some very precise advice. So if council is interested in pursuing this, that is advice we'd like to provide in a written report, because it is precise and does have an impact on tax revenue as we get into some of these definitions.
Sometimes we get too alarmed at future possibilities, I think. However, we do have a motion on the floor, which I will support. And I don't see any other hands up, so I will call a question.
Bressie in favor.
And that motion carries 3-1. Thank you very much for coming today. And we'll move on to bylaw policy review, barrier-free grant policy. And to introduce this, I'm going to look for Mr. Tarrant.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. I'll invite Director Pinnock to come up, who will present the report.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Pinnock.
Thank you, and through the chair. In the fall of 2023, administration brought forward policy amendments for several policies related to our grants and incentives program. One of those requests was to recapitalize the barrier-free grant. Council subsequently approved the recapitalization of barrier-free for $80,000 and directed administration to bring back a report on amending the policy to increase the grant amount from $10,000 to $20,000 maximum. Administration has provided some background in the report on previous recipients of this grant. Of the 15 projects that were funded, 7 were greater than $20,000 for their overall project, and 2 were greater than $40,000. The draft attached policy outlines track changes to reflect changes from a maximum of $10,000 to $20,000. Changing the amount of the grant will not necessarily result in greater economic impact to the city, but will further support businesses to cover costs of projects. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that council or committee may have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. Just curious, do we have any in the queue currently for barrier-free grants? Are any applicants looking at this that are waiting on this decision, I guess?
Thank you, through the chair. No, there was one that came in early January that was approved and is in progress. A couple of the other previous projects are just wrapping up, but there are no new projects right now in the queue.
Okay.
Thank you. If I see no other questions, I would ask for business arising. Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. I'd move the committee recommend council approve amendments to policy 356 as presented. Increase the barrier-free grant maximum from $10,000 to maximum of $20,000. Just speak to this. This is probably my favorite grant program we've done in the economic development thing, just because I love the social impact of it. I think since we've instituted, costs have escalated dramatically, so it makes sense to revisit the amount.
Thank you. That motion is in order, so I will call a question.
Oh, sorry,
Sorry, Councillor Palat had a question.
No, not a question. Just for me, I won't be supporting it, and I guess the reason why is I don't like that half of these grants, if we would have opened this up like this from the start, this fund would have been basically closed now. We would have prescribed all the money and we wouldn't have funds moving forward. I like the idea of helping small businesses. I don't think it's our job to spend all the money to help small businesses, though, to do this work. We've had this grant open for 3 years now, and so for me, I like it at 10,000. I'd like to see 8 people prescribe it, not 4. I don't think it's the city's responsibility to brunt the bear of the costs on this stuff, so I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Bressie.
Yeah, Thank you. And I totally respect why some of my colleagues want to support it. For me, this isn't really about helping the businesses. For me, this really is about helping our residents. When I talk to residents with disabilities, I hear again and again that we're doing a pretty good job with public infrastructure. We've gotten so much better at snow removal. We've gotten so much better with transit. We've gotten so much better with our public facilities. But I hear residents say, "Yeah, but I can't go out for a meal with my friends, or I can't access this type of service I want to access." And so for me, this isn't really so much, even though it's under the economic development bucket. For me, this isn't so much about helping businesses. It's about helping our residents that need help to fully enjoy the community.
Mayor Clayton.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. Echoing some of Councillor Bressy's comments, I appreciate that this grant, although it's not solely meeting the needs of all barriers that may be in our community for accessibility. And this is a matching grant to Councillor Platt's comments in regards to helping 8 versus 4. I appreciate that. However, the cost of having improved accessibility has gone up overall. If we are now, by increasing this amount, able to have 4 people that have matching dollars, and therefore 4 businesses or 4 organizations in our community have better accessibility, that's a win. I don't think this is turning away 8 people. We haven't seen that volume of applications. However, now if we see 4 people subscribe to this because $20,000 matching makes it more viable to have accessibility added to the facility, then that's a win. And then next council or even next year, we can look to replenish that amount. So maybe 4 more people get the opportunity to improve the accessibility at their facility. So it's not that we're going to have less people. I actually think there's an opportunity for us to be fully subscribed in this barrier grant procedure because the appropriate amount of funding will be available at a 50% matching ratio. So I will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I will call a question. And that does carry 3 to 1. Moving on to the outstanding items list, I would look to Mr. Tarrant.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. So a few items. So item 1303 regarding the accessible grant, recommend that be taken off as that was dealt with here today. For 1282 regarding the land use bylaw amendments regarding agricultural use, I would recommend that just be updated with the motion that was made earlier. We have 1300 regarding the outdoor event structures. There was a verbal update provided at the last committee meeting that felt met the intent there, so we would recommend that being removed. And I believe that's it for updates, but can certainly take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarrant. I don't see any questions, but I would look for a motion. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. I just move that we accept the InvestGP Committee outstanding item list as amended.
Thank you very much. I'll call that question. And that motion does carry. With that, the InvestGP committee meeting is adjourned, and we will move on to the next meeting in 2 or 3 minutes, I think.